Moses, Part H, Numbers 11 and 12. And so I'm going to start us off by reading about half the chapter of Numbers chapter 11. I'll start in verse 1 and I'll wrap it up at verse 17. Here's Numbers chapter 11. Now the people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. The people therefore cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and also the sons of Israel wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There is nothing at all to look at except this manna." Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium. The people would go about and gather it and grind it between two millstones, or beat it in the mortar, and boil it in the pot and make cakes with it. And its taste was as the taste of cakes baked with oil. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall with it. Now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each man at the doorway of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all this people on me? Was it I who conceived all this people? Was it I who brought them forth, that you should say to me, 'Carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land which you swore to their fathers'? Where am I going to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me, saying, 'Give us meat that we may eat.' I alone am not able to carry all this people, because it is too burdensome for me. So if you're going to deal thus with me, please kill me at once, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness." So the Lord therefore said to Moses, "Gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and their officers, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. Then I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take of the Spirit who is upon you, and shall put him upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you will not bear it all alone." All right, so our introductory paragraph, the remainder of Exodus, most of Leviticus, and the beginning of Numbers was the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, with a few breaks of narrative. In Numbers 9, Israel, still encamped at the foot of Mount Sinai, celebrate the Passover. This is the first anniversary of the Exodus. Numbers 10 takes place about 6 weeks later, when Israel left Sinai to journey toward the Promised Land through the desolate wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. Number 1, Numbers 11:1 gives us a chief negative character trait of the Israelites during this time. What is it? Complaining. They are professional complainers. They are really, really good at it. Number 2, how did God respond in verse 1? The anger of the Lord burned against them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. Number 3, verse 4 seems to identify two groups of people in the camp. The NASB uses the word rabble to describe the group that is not the sons of Israel. Who could this rabble be? And we find help for that in Exodus 12, 37, and 38. And there it calls them, did anybody get it? A mixed multitude. So these are not Jews. They're different people. They're Gentiles of some sort, whether they're of Egyptian origin or some other tribe. But they're traveling along with Israel, and it's they who start this business of, "Oh, we wish we had meat. Remember the meat we had in Egypt." So number 4, what did the rabble's greedy desires lead the Israelites to weep over? Meat, fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onion, garlic. So they have a whole menu there, don't they? And they're looking at the manna, which is what they have every single day, And instead of being thankful to God that in the middle of the wilderness they have food to eat, rather than that, they start going through their restaurant menu list and saying, oh, the stuff we used, they kind of forget that they were slaves in Egypt. By the way, there can be a tendency among Christians sometimes to romanticize the old life. Sometimes we think, oh, before I got saved, I used to have such fun going to parties. What was it that we did before we came to Christ? Well, we were reprobates. We were, I don't have a lot of exposure to that kind of lifestyle, but I have some. And I remember very clearly in college going into class of a Monday morning, and half of my classmates were hungover. And they would say, oh man, what a great weekend. And they looked like death warmed over, and they reeked, and they couldn't even take notes. And they're talking about, oh, what a great weekend, we got so smashed. Well, if I have a nice time, I like to remember it. And these people, so we can do that sometimes. We can romanticize the old sinful life. That's what they're doing. They're romanticizing. They were slaves. They were beaten. They tried to kill all their babies. What are they doing talking about leeks and onions? But this is, their mind is twisted. They're so greedy. They're so complaining. Instead of getting on their knees and saying, thank you, God, for giving us food to eat in the middle of nowhere, instead of that, they start saying, oh, man, the fish we had in Egypt. Well, we can be like that too. So, the mixed multitude causes this. The Israelites are weeping over meat and fish and cucumbers. Number 5 question, what was God's response to this in verse 10? The anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. So God was not just a little mad, he was mad. What a bunch of ingrates. What a bunch of groaners these people are turning out to be. Number 6, what was Moses' emotional response to this in verse 10? He was displeased. So you can understand where he's coming from. He's kind of getting it from both sides. God is angry, and the people, he walks through the camp. Moses walks through the camp. Every tent he passes, he hears people inside, oh, this is so horrible. I hate this stuff. And, it's grinding on him. It's wearing him down. So, number 7, one might describe Moses' words to God as a rant. Paraphrase his outpouring, 11 through 15. yeah, pretty good. Woe is me. Life is hard. I'm in the garden eating worms. What'd you get, Sharon?
Why haven't I found favor in your sight? The people weep to me. I can't do this alone. Why don't you just kill me?
Yeah.
I guess we both complaining almost as much.
Yeah. So, isn't it interesting how many things we can learn about human nature from reading a narrative like this? How easy it is. Moses is a great man. Moses is an amazing guy, but he's not perfect. And he too can kind of get down in the mouth and groaning, Lord, why did you do this to me? Don't you love me anymore? And so now he's complaining too. Number 8, how would God ease Moses' burden? God would take some of his spirit that was on Moses or him and put it on the 70 elders of Israel, so that he would not bear the burden alone. So he's going to give them the Holy Spirit, just as much as, maybe not as much, but some to some degree as Moses has. And this is going to be guys that Moses can delegate to. He can hand off responsibilities. All these people that are weeping and crying, Jared, go deal with them. Go stop their crying. So, number 9, How did God answer the people's complaint for meat? Verses 19 and 20. God would give them meat until it came out of their nostrils and became loathsome to them. What does loathsome mean? It's sickening. You can't even stand the sight or the smell of it. It is, it makes you start to retch to think about it. So, did you pick up on that? It's going to be at the end of chapter 11. Just real quick, look at this in verse 31. We'll get to it in our questions here momentarily, where Moses says, Lord, do you realize you just promised meat to a lot of people? Again, be reminded of the numbers. So a base number for the men between ages of about 20 and 50, between 20 and 50 years old, is 600,000. And if we assume that they're married, if that's kind of an assumption we can make, then we're at 1.2 million. If each of those families has 2 kids, what are we up to now? 2.4 million. And we haven't counted young men who aren't married yet, or people who are over a certain age. It is, and we've only assumed 2 children per couple. Without stretching too far, we could be looking at 3 million, 4 million, 5 million people, without pushing it too far. So Moses is going to say to God, Lord, you made a promise, deli meat for all the Jews. How's that going to work? In verse 31 of chapter 11, now there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. So a cubit is how far? 18 inches. So 2 cubits from the ground is 36 inches. And how far does it go? With a day's journey, how far can you walk in a day? 10 miles? 15 miles? And it's on both sides of the camp. There's double that amount. That's a lot of quail. God says, you like meat? All right, here's your meat. So, getting back to our questions. Number 10, what did God say about the people's weeping? You have rejected Yahweh who is among you. So God says, your weeping is a rejection of me. When we complain, and let's be blunt about it, when we complain at God, I don't like what you've done in my life. I don't like being sick. I don't like being poor. I don't like the job I've got, whatever, you fill in the blank. What are we actually doing? We are rejecting Yahweh and his sovereign working in our lives. He has put things in place in our lives. We are who we are. We have the physical makeup that we have. We have the parents that God gave us. We have the families that God gave us. We have the physical abilities or disabilities that God gave us. We have the job, we have the house, we have the car that God gave us. And if we say, oh God, this is so hard, why do you do this to me? You don't like me very much, do you? We are actually rejecting God. We think we're just being a little spleeny, but we're actually being very, very bitter. We're being rebellious is what this is. And so the Lord puts it out there. You are rejecting me. Question number 11. Moses had trouble seeing how God would keep his promise to provide meat. What did Yahweh say to him? Is the Lord's hand shortened, or NASB says power limited? So it's a figure of speech. It's like Rebecca sometimes asks me when she's doing a chocolate order, and I'm in the living room and she's going into the washroom to get stuff out, she'll say, Dad, can you reach that on the top shelf? Because she's the shortest one in the family. And so you could use this illustration, is my arm shortened? I can't quite reach it. And God is saying to Moses, are you saying that my arm is short, that I can't do what I said I would do? Is my power limited? Number 12, when God put his spirit upon the 70 elders chosen to help Moses, they prophesied, including the 2 of them still in the camp. Moses' assistant Joshua wanted to restrain them. What did Moses say? Are you envious or jealous for my sake? Would that all Yahweh's people were prophets, that Yahweh would put his spirit upon them. So Moses actually says, you know, I wish that God would put his spirit on everybody, and they would all prophesy. In other words, he says to Joshua, don't be jealous for me. Joshua is saying, Moses is the leader. He's the prophet. He gets to do this. Nobody else does. But Moses, don't be jealous like that. 13, next God fulfilled his promise of meat. What did the wind bring in verse 31? Quail. And what happened while the meat was still between their teeth? God struck the people with a very severe plague. There they buried the people who had been greedy. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to look at that and say, they learned their lesson. From this point on, nobody grumbled, nobody complained. Every morning they got up and they said, thank you, God, for the manna. And they never again said, oh, the cucumbers and the... Well, I'm sure that's that way with us, right? We don't ever, you know, when we learn our lesson, God brings us through a tough time and he kind of disciplines us. He gets out the Board of Education to apply it to the seat of learning, and we come through that experience and say, never again. From now on, I will always be grateful to God. That's how it is, right? Next time around, maybe it's not the leeks and the onions, it's something else. Lord, how come I have such a horrible car? All these other people have nice cars. How come I can't have a nice car? Right? Well, that's it's called the sin nature. Number 15. And I'm going to read a few verses out of Numbers chapter 12 now. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who is on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, you 3 come out to the tent of meeting. So the 3 of them came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the doorway of the tent. And he called Aaron and Miriam. When they had both come forward, he said, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses? So the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed. But when the cloud had withdrawn from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. As Aaron turned toward Miriam, behold, she was leprous. Question number 15, in Numbers 12:1, it is not clear if Moses' wife Zipporah had died, or if Zipporah is being described differently here. Remember that she was at least half Midianite. Moses' father-in-law is said to be the priest of Midian. Yet here, without a name, Moses' wife is said to be Cushite. Cush is an ancient name for Ethiopia. If Zipporah is the wife mentioned in 12:1, why do Miriam and Aaron bring up Moses' marriage at this point, instead of when she joined the Israelites back in Exodus 18. However this is to be understood, it seems that criticizing Moses over his wife was only a pretext. It was an excuse. What was the real reason for their complaining in verse 2? Exactly. So Moses is the leader. He is the one who talks to God. He's the one who issues the orders. And Miriam and Aaron are kind of subordinate. And they get their dander up and they say, we can prophesy too. We've prophesied too. And they're, isn't it strange to think of a man like Moses having a dysfunctional family? But there it is. His brother and his sister are arguing with him about who's in charge and who has the right to speak from the Lord. And so, it seems as if, I guess we're going to get to it here momentarily, one of the two is punished and the other is not, and that would seem to indicate something. So, number 16, remember that Moses is the human author of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, including what we're reading right now here in Numbers. In this light, does verse 3 seem strange to you? So this is a parenthesis. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. So Moses wrote that. And so he's saying, Moses is the most humble man on earth. What are we to make of that? Is he being a little facetious? Is he actually proud? So I agree with Carolyn. I think that he is actually stating the facts. I don't think that he's actually proud at all. I think that he is relaying, I know how very small I am. I know that I'm not a big guy. God picked me for this job. I actually didn't want the job, but I'm doing it because God picked me. Paula.
He had a speech impediment also, so he may have truly been humble.
Yes.
Self-conscious,
Yeah, I think he truly is humble. I think he actually is, and he's not putting on airs. He's not pretending to be humble. There is a kind of false humility. People can put on a show of being humble when they actually think very highly of themselves. But I don't think Moses is like that. So I think this is an actual statement. So we find something similar in Paul's writings. He says things like, I am the chief of sinners. Paul says that. Huh? What does he mean? Well, he has a very high estimation of the holiness of God, and he has a very appropriate view of himself. So, Paul, too, was a great man of God, but he, like Moses, was humble. I think that you could come up to the Apostle Paul and ask him a question, and he wouldn't, roll back on his heels and declaim like some sort of a professor. I think he would answer you like a regular guy. And Moses, too. Moses would talk to you. So he is humble. Number 17, suddenly God intervened, summoning all 3 parties to the tent of meeting, where he descended in a pillar of cloud. Why was he angry with Aaron and Miriam? Yeah, so God is the one who picked Moses. So if you're going to pick on Moses, you're picking. This is nothing other than complaining about the manna. It's the same concept. I gave you the manna. It's your food. Eat it and be thankful. But instead, we wish we had leeks and onions. And now Miriam and Aaron, we can prophesy too. Well, it's complaining against God's servant, God's choice of a man, a spokesman. And so, number 18, how does God describe his relationship with Moses? Yeah, he's faithful. I speak to him mouth to mouth or face to face. He says, if I choose to have a prophet, I'll communicate with him in a dream or a vision. A guy will have a weird thing happen to him in the middle of the night or whatever. He'll go into a trance, and I'll communicate with him. With Moses, I talk to him face to face. This is a very unusual thing. And so God is backing Moses up, and he's saying, Moses is an unusual case, and you, Aaron and Miriam, had better get that squared away in your head, that I picked him to be the lead guy. I chose him. Number 19, what chief characteristic does he single out in Moses for mention? Faithful. He's faithful in all my house. He does what I tell him. I ask him to do this, and he does it. And so he's a faithful man. Number 20, after the cloud of God's glory had departed from over the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, what punishment was revealed? Miriam is a leper. She is white, and not a healthy white, but a very, very sickly white. So leprosy is a skin and nerve disease that results in chunks of flesh dying and falling off. And like bad. And Aaron has a meltdown. He turns to look at her and realizes with a shock, she is full of leprosy. It's a bad case. And why would Miriam have leprosy and not Aaron? So it doesn't come out and say it, but there's an implication. Probably she's the instigator. Probably she's the one who started mumbling, how come Moses gets all the attention? I'm his big sister. Doesn't he remember that I took care of him when he was in the basket? And, and then after mumbling that for a while, Aaron picks up on it. And he says, yeah, why is that? But it was Miriam who started this. Number 21, do you think Aaron was contrite and humbled? Yes. Do you think Miriam was contrite and humbled? I think so. We don't find other issues. There are a few issues with Aaron after this, but mostly not. And, it looks like they learned their lesson. Number 23, Moses asked God to heal Miriam. What was God's reply? Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterward she may be received again. So it is a humbling thing. The whole nation, these hundreds of thousands, millions of people, are all waiting for one woman to get better so that she can be allowed back in so then they can move on. So everybody knew it. She grumbled and the Lord heard it, but now her punishment is rather public. So what lessons, number 24, can we learn from these two chapters? Trust the Lord. Don't grumble. Don't be a groaner. Don't complain. Instead, replace that grumbling attitude with gratitude. Replace the grumbling heart with a heart of thanksgiving. And, just accept what God gives us. Say, thank you, Lord. This is way more than I deserve. And be thankful. And if we can be that way, then we avoid doing what God said the Israelites had done, and they're weeping and groaning and crying and complaining, rejecting him. By being thankful, we're saying, Lord, you're in charge, and what you have given me is just right. It's exactly right. I couldn't wish for anything better, anything more. It's all good. So, any other comments, questions? Take your prayer bulletins, please, and let's take a look at things